Okay, so let's get started. Today we are going to take our first steps using a REST API, a web API in an Angular application. We will combine some basic functionality in Angular with signals to display some data. Your wish was that we use the My Little Pony API, so this is exactly what we are going to do. Please create a new Angular application. I will also do that, and I will also commit it to the course repository. So it doesn't matter where you put it, you will get my code. In my case, I will call it 0030 ng web API basics. This is how I call the folder. And the project will call, how can we call the project? I think Pony Express is a really nice application title. Okay, so we will create the Pony Express. Good. Please create the Angular application. You know the statement that I used here, the command that I used here is part of your lecture notes. Just check out the HackMD workspace, and there you have the ng-new statement with all the necessary settings. As you can remember, and we have practiced it now multiple times, you get a brand new empty web application in the corresponding folder, and I ask you to open this web application in your favorite development environment for web development, be it Visual Studio Code or WebStorm or whatever you want to use. I will wait for a few moments until everybody has created the app and opened the app. Okay, now we have created the brand new Angular application. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to open up source app and here app configuration. Now, so far, we have two providers here. The first one is provide zone change detection. And I hope you can remember what zone.js is. We discussed it last time when we had our lecture about signals. The router, we did that in the very first lesson about Angular. And today we are going to add something in addition here. And that is the provide HTTP client. HTTP client is the, as the name suggests, client for the HTTP protocol, which is built in to Angular. Inside of this provide HTTP client, you can specify some additional parameters, which I don't know from the top of my head. For instance, here it is highly recommended to enable fetch for applications that use server-side rendering for better performance and compatibility. We are not using server-side rendering in this course, but still, let's follow this guideline and call with fetch here directly in the provide HTTP client call. Are you familiar with the fetch API from previous courses? Yes? So then you know what the fetch API is, and by specifying with fetch, we can make sure that Angular uses the new fetch API and not the old XML HTTP request API, which is really old. Good? Very nice. So this is the first thing that you have to remember. During your exam and so on, you can rely on that this is already there if you need to use an HTTP client. Same is true for the Matura. Things like that will already be present. You don't need to learn this by heart. It's just there. You have to be able to read it and you have to be able to use it. Okay, very nice. So let's create a very simple web API call. And for that, we are going to create a new component, npx ng generate component pony list. I call it pony list. You can call it whatever you want. And as you can hopefully remember, once we have the component, we need to specify it in the routes. So we say path, that is my pony list, and the component is my pony list component. Let's also specify a path which is empty, redirect to with path match full. That makes sure that if the user doesn't enter anything in the URL, we are going to be directly redirected to our nice little pony list. Last but not least, don't forget to clean up the app component HTML. There is a lot of marketing blah here in it. Just delete it. All we need is the router outlet, and that's it. So if you start your application, then Vite will do its job, and we will get a browser window that says PonyList works. I will wait a few moments until everybody finished to enter the corresponding code and to make sure that the PonyList or the placeholder for the PonyList is displayed on the screen. Good, so we have a working Angular application and it even runs, so it should look like this as I told you before. And now we need to start coding. Now what we want to do in our TypeScript file, please open the TypeScript file of the PonyList component, is we want to write a little bit of code and display the list of ponies in the simplest possible way. Now let's find out the URL that we can use. And I did that already, or we did that a minute ago. That would be a possible HTTP request. ponyapi.net/v1/character/all. Okay, you know what? Let's copy this thing and store it here just in a helper variable, okay? Const pony list URL, so that we just have it here in our code. The next thing, if we read the documentation of the Pony API, then we will see that, where is it? This is here. This supports limit and offset. So we can limit the number of ponies we get back, and we can jump over a certain number of ponies. I would say let's specify limit equals 10, so that we get back 10 ponies, okay? I think that makes sense, so we are not overwhelmed by cuteness, if you understand what I mean. Yep.
Sorry, shouldn't it be static read only?
Pardon?
Shouldn't it be static read only and not const, because it's a...
Don't worry, I will remove this. It's just a note. It's just, I see what you mean. Here, this const here, you are absolutely right, but it's just a note. I just wanted to note it down. We are going to remove this. This will not be, will not be part of our application. Of course, we need to make it read only. I could have done it like this. Maybe it would have been a better idea to just write the note. We are going to use that in this way. Yes, you have a question.
Why exactly is it meant only in Angular, not const?
Very good question. Very good question. We have the question why we can't say const something equals to 1, 2, 3, for instance. In a class, you cannot have a const. A const can only be global, so you can put it, for instance, here. That is okay. And a const can also be inside a function. But a const thingy cannot exist on a class. What you can do is you can make it static. That would be valid. Or you can make it read-only, which is essentially static, but read-only. Okay? So const is simply not allowed. You can also not say let. It's not possible inside a class. I hope that answers your question. Good. Very good. So, nice. Now we need the HTTP client, and we need to inject the HTTP client. So what we are going to do is we are going to say private read-only HTTP client equals to inject HTTP client. Now we have an HTTP client. So just like you learned in the last exercise, the Morse code exercise, we cannot just inject our own services, but we can ask Angular for stock services, for services that Angular provides out of the box. And in this case, we ask Angular for the HTTP client. Are we good? Nice. Very good. Very good. So I told you that before the break, I would like to make it as simple as possible, but also very ugly. So we are going to write code to see a bunch of ponies, but please don't take this code as your as a guidance. It's really just the first step. In the next hour, we are going to improve this code until we reach a status that is acceptable. This is a very quick and dirty first step, okay? I will call it here ponies, any, or unknown, undefined, and I will set it to undefined. Any is bad. Any is like go-to. You know that we are not allowed to use go-to in this school? You shouldn't be allowed to use any. It's just a quick hack just to see something, okay? Good. The next thing that we are going to do is we are going to use a method which is part of the onInit interface. OnInit is part of Angular, and if you implement the onInit interface, you get a method which is called ngOnInit. The ngOnInit function is automatically called when the component is initialized. It's a little bit later than the constructor, but for our quick and dirty hack, it's a good place to start. Now, in the ngOnInit, we do the following. We say what GitHub Copilot suggests to us. This. And we try to understand what we have here. We say http client.get, then we use the Pony API URL, then we say subscribe. I will tell you later, in a few minutes after the break, more about subscribe. And then we simply assign the ponies that we get back from the server to our local variable. Okay? Now in our HTML up here, we are going to replace this one with an, I don't know, h1, my little ponies, and then we are going to do something which is very, very ugly, ponies pipe JSON. And in the imports, we need our JSON pipe. This simply takes the content of the object and prints the content as JSON in HTML. Understand what I mean? So maybe we do a pre around it, whoops, to get a better font, something like this. And then, drum roll please, drum roll please. Where is our application? Here it is. Boom! We made our first HTTP request. So I give you time to catch up. Let me open all the files. I will help you overcome any problems. This was the quick and dirty version of accessing our Pony API. Please try to get it to run. And I think, let me check. I always forget the time of the breaks.
50.
At 50, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very good. So we have 2 minutes left. So we exactly have the time to finish this example. And then after the break, we can continue. So please try to catch up and try to get it running. I will help you. And in 5 minutes, we are going to continue. Okay, welcome back. Let's get started to make our code a little bit more beautiful and to get rid of the quick and dirty solution that we created before the break. Now, before we do that, we have to take a closer look at the http client.get method. Today in the morning, we repeated some basics about the HTTP protocol. And we reminded ourselves that there are multiple different HTTP methods, like get, or post, or put, or patch, or delete. Now in this case, we want to read ponies. Therefore, we are going to use get. Now, guess what method you are going to use when you want to send a post request? Post. When you want to send a patch request? Patch. I think you get the idea, right? So here we are just saying HTTP client get. And then we specify a URL. Now, building this URL can be improved, but this is not the first thing that I would like to discuss with you. The first thing that I would like to discuss with you is the return type of this method. It is called an observable. Have you heard about the observer or observable design pattern in the past? Yes? Okay, let's try to recap what observable means. An observable object is an object where somebody can subscribe to notification if something changes. I could ask you, you're the observable, I subscribe to a message that you send to me whenever the minute changes on the clock. Every minute you're going to say, I have a message for you, we have a new time. Get the idea?
Yeah.
So observable is a thing that actively informs its subscribers, and there can be many subscribers, when something changed. And exactly this observable pattern is used when we call web APIs in Angular. The web API call results in a web request, in an HTTP request sent to the server. And the observable will send us a message as soon as the response arrives. Got it? So the request is the call to get, and the response will lead to a message to the subscriber. This is why I subscribed here. Subscribe means I'm interested in the result of this HTTP request, and that gives me the result of the HTTP request here in this object. I work with any, so we didn't specify the data type yet, but we will fix that in a minute. Now let's take a look how this looks like in the browser. If I press F12, go to the network tab, limit here to fetch XML HTTP request, XHR, and if I reload this app, we are going to see that we have here the HTTP request that is the result of exactly this line of code. So here you see the URL. This is exactly this URL. Here you see the method get. This is exactly this method here. And then you see a bunch of other things like the request headers and the response headers. Oh, here are the request headers. Here are the response headers. Okay? Looks pretty good. It's exactly what we expect. Now what we get back is a status code. Status code 200 means okay. Does anybody know other famous status codes? Yes?
404.
404 means?
Not found.
Not found, exactly. Any other things? Have you ever seen a 500? Yeah?
Internal server error.
Internal server error, exactly. 400. Yeah?
Bad request.
Bad request, exactly. 201. Yeah? Created, very good. Where do you look up all the different status codes? Yeah?
There's a website called http.cat.
Exactly. HTTP status cats, and if you're not a cat person, of course, there is an HTTP status dogs, obviously. Okay, so if you don't like cats, take a look at the HTTP status dogs. I mean, this is, I've never looked up the teapot thing. Oh, they don't have an I have a teapot, I'm a teapot in this list. So it's not, I don't know the number. Do you know the number?
418.
418? Let's check. I'm a teapot, here it is. Oh my god, is this cute. Yeah, okay, good. So HTTP status codes, let's focus on the important stuff. Yeah, I think that's it. Now we have to think about the data structure. If you take a look what we get back an object. This object contains a status. This object contains data, which is an array. And in this array, we have an ID, name, alias, and some other things like images. So how can we make our API type safe? The first thing that we need to do you have an idea?
Create an interface with the parameter.
Oh, very good. You already have a very good web knowledge in this class. I'm really happy about that. You say create an interface. I say, no, we are not creating an interface. We are going to create a type. This is a little bit more modern. So what I'm going to do, is I'm going to say type pony response and make an object out of it. Now let's take a look what we have here. We have an object with status and data. So here we have status. Do we really need the status? I don't think so. So let's just specify the data. Now data is an object which will become an array. The first one is the ID. Now the ID here is, I can't remember, a number. Then we have the name, which is a string, and then we have the alias, which is also a string. Now we have a data type which contains the most important information about our pony response. Please note that we do not need to specify the entire structure. It's perfectly fine to only describe those parts of the object that we are interested in. The rest can be ignored if you don't need it. Okay? So we have a type which contains a field called data. Data is an array, and the array is of type object with ID, name, and alias. Now we can improve our code at least a little bit. We can say it's either a pony response array, sorry, not an array, a pony response, or undefined. And now comes the important part. The GET request accepts a type parameter, and this type parameter will then define the data type that we get back. So now we got rid of this ugly any data type. Now we are way more type safe. Okay? Very nice. Let's work with that in our user interface. So in the user interface, I'm going to create an unordered list. I'm going to create an if in front of it, and I'm going to say, what is the name here? It was ponies. If ponies and ponies.length, this is what I want. So if ponies is not undefined and ponies dot data dot length, this is what I want. Now I have it. So if we have at least one pony and pony is not undefined, let's define an unordered list where we use a for loop. The for loop says p of ponies, semicolon, in track, and now for the first time we can say p.id. Because now we have an ID. Ponies, in this case, is of course wrong, because we need to go through ponies.data. Sorry for that. And now we can specify an li with the pony ID and maybe the pony name. Let me quickly check. Yeah, works perfectly fine. We get the first 10 My Little Ponies. I will leave the code on the screen and give you the TypeScript code to the right, so you see how this works. This is it. And then we are going to discuss the code again, so we make sure that everybody really understands what's going on. But first, let's try to catch up and enter the code and check whether the Angular application displays a list of ponies. Let me describe again what's going on here. Please note that we specify here the return data type, and we define here in the HTTP GET that this should be our return data type. By telling the HTTP client.get statement that we expect a pony response, we can simply use this assignment and store the pony response here in our class. And with that, we get type checking throughout our Angular component. So this is a kind of recipe for you. You have to define the data type that is returned. You have to call the HTTP client.get, passing the data type, store a value according to the requirements in the class, and do the necessary binding. Please remember the track here. Track should be used with the primary key of the data of the records that you display in this for loop. Are we good? Very nice. Now in practice, nobody writes data types like this by hand. Obviously, those data types are generated automatically. There is a standard which is called Open API Specification, also known as Swagger. Maybe I've heard it before. Swagger is a standard with which an API can define the data types and operations it supports, and you can generate the values from it automatically. We will not talk about this in this course at the beginning. We will talk about Swagger and OAS later on, maybe next year or maybe later this year, depends on how fast we progress. But don't expect that anybody is writing something like this by hand, not in practice. You had a question?
Yes. Why should we use subscribe instead of await in Angular?
Give me a second. Give me a second. You are simply too fast. We are going to use await, but one step after the other. Any other questions? Good. Now, writing it in this way, something like this, is not the way that we want it to have in our application. What we want to have is we want to get rid of this subscribe. Subscribing to something manually is not ideal. Not ideal at all. Because at the end of the day, we want to use, as you know, signals up here, right? Because this is what we learned. We want to use signals for data binding. Now let's restructure our application a little bit in order to get it signally, if you want. Now let's restructure the data type here. I'm going to extract this data type here, cut it out, and say this is a pony, and paste it here, and say this is a pony array. Okay? That's the first thing that I'm going to do, because that will make my code a little bit easier to read and easier to understand. So I'm not using the inline type definition. I'm going to extract it into a separate type definition. Now we can enhance here in line 23 our data type and can say this is a pony array. Pony array. It's a little bit better here. Now, as you know, we want to use a signal. So what are we going to do? Is we are going to say ponies equals to a signal of type pony array or undefined, and the default value is undefined. And with that, we have signalified our Angular component. So far, so good. There shouldn't be too many new chapters here. Everybody should understand that. We practiced that last time. You practiced it in the Morse code exercise. So that should now feel familiar to you. Does it? Doesn't it? That would be the correct term. Good. Now let's think about this ng on init stuff here. What I want to do is I want to separate these things a little bit. I want to do a separate method which just deals with the HTTP client stuff, and then we do the rest of the logic inside of ng on init. Let me show you what I mean. I am going to create a new function, but this will be a function, and I will call this function getPonies. This will return a promise of pony array. Sorry, pony response. Can you repeat it? You need to include it. Maybe you have forgotten to import it. Got it? Okay. So I will copy the entire HTTP GET statement here into our get ponies. But I will write a first value of around this thing. And I will tell it to return the result. Let me show you how it looks like. This is how the entire function looks like. I will zoom in and let's discuss what this message does. Now you have heard before that HTTP client.get returns an observable. Can anybody repeat what I told you before, what an observable is or what an observable does? Anybody? Yeah, try.
You can subscribe to it.
You can subscribe to it, and the observable will do what?
Notify you when something happens.
When something happens. Can multiple events happen, or is observable something that changes only
It can
once?
happen multiple times.
Exactly. An observable sweet spot is when you have something that changes regularly. Your watch, every second you see it ticking. It changes every second. That would be perfect for an observable, right? But how many results can come back from an HTTP client.get? How many? One request and how many responses? Yeah? One. Exactly one. HTTP client.get always returns a single response. That's it. Full stop. So, observable seems kind of an overkill, doesn't it? Why do we need an observable if we get a single response? And this is exactly where first value from comes into play. First value from is a helper method that will simply say, this is a single value observable, just wait for the first response and then get rid of the observable. And that's exactly what we want, right? We get a single response and therefore we use first value from. And let me show you how beautiful this code will look like if we have this infrastructure. We simply say const pony response equals to await this.get ponies. Let's add the async here. And then we can simply say this.ponies.set pony response.data. And let's get rid of the void here. This is beautiful, isn't it? Ask the server for a response, set the signal. This is the pattern that I want you to remember from today's lesson. This is how, at least for now, without in-depth knowledge about observables and what they do and how we can add error handling and all this stuff, this is the pattern that I want you to use. For data binding, we use signals. For every data access, we create a separate method. It contains first value from, and then the HTTP get, post, put, patch, delete. In your caller method, you use async await and set the signal. This is the pattern that I want you to use. If you want to make it super, super, super perfect, beautiful, you can put this method into a separate service. You can create an Angular service that contains exactly that method. That's optional for now. But later on, we are going to do that. Yeah.
So we basically have a service like HTML get or...
You have a service like pony data access, and you have a method get all ponies.
Okay.
Get pony by ID. Update pony. Understand what I mean? Good. For now, it's perfectly fine if we have it inside of our component. We will talk about structuring that with services later. Let's fix the HTML. We now don't need the data anymore because ponies here is already the array So I can get rid of that one. And I can get rid of that one. And what else did I do wrong? Of course, I forgot to call it. Now this time I can use it like that. Okay? Let's check if it works. Here it is. Wonderful. I'll leave the code on the screen. And I can help you overcome any coding problems that you might have. I'll scroll down so you see the code. This is the pattern that is super important for you to remember from today's lesson, because this is what you need to write in the exam. This is what you need to write for homeworks. Very nice. We have no questions at the moment, so we can make our application a little bit more interesting, tiny little bit, and then we will go into an exercise time. Now, where is my Pony API? Here we have the Pony API. You see, here we have the v1 character all, and we have limit and offset. What I want to do is I want to add the capability to go to the next page. So what I want here in the get ponies is I want to add two parameters here. Offset, which is a number, and limit, which is a number. By default, we say, please use offset 0 and return the top 10 ponies. Now what we can do here with the limit parameter, we can either do it in a simple way, something like this. Oops. $limit and do the offset thingy here. See? This is now injecting the parameters inside of the URL. That will allow us to customize the number of ponies that we get. So if we take a look at our application, here it is, we get the first 10. But if we change that to 5, we will get only the first 5 ponies. If we say jump over the first 5 and give me the next 5, we will get ponies 6 to 10. Understand the principle? Very good. Now, for web APIs like this, there is a special class which is called HTTP params. It helps you to create the HTTP params. So what you can do is you can say let params equals to new HTTP params, this one, dot set. Exactly that. GitHub Copilot suggests it for us. It says HTTP param set limit and set offset. And if we have that, we can change our code a little bit and add all the parameters with a single params.toString. Let me quickly check if it works. Yes, it still works. Let me zoom in. So type the code in, and then I will show you why this is really, really useful. You ask here, right? No, it's not. This was me relying too much on GitHub Copilot. Here, yeah, come on. It's the same. So it's easier like that. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, let me describe why this is particularly useful. Now, just imagine that you want to make the offset parameter and the limit parameter optional. If I have it like this, I can make something like this. If offset, then params equals param set. If limit something like this. And this makes it much easier to use because you do not need to manually think about, okay, do I need to add the ampersand statement? What is building the URL manually, if you have optional parameters, is much harder. So I highly encourage you to use HTTP params like shown here. If you are unsure during an exam, for instance, and you simply want to use a string interpolation, as I showed you before, it's also fine. But this is the better and more professional way of passing query string parameters. Let's check. Still works. Question?
In the if the params of set, does it require to be overwritten?
Yes, it must be overwritten. It must be used exactly like that. So if you forget this one, your params.set call will disappear into nothing. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a template. This is a template that you will need to practice in the upcoming weeks over and over and over and over again. Data access method, some parameters, first value from, HTTP GET, defining a data type, using signals for data binding, and then in the template benefit from the signals and display everything using for loop, if, and so on and so on. This is the most, now we have reached the status where we can build interesting applications. You will learn more. You will learn about post and put and patch and delete. Don't worry, we will come to that. But this is the first step. I wanted to get pretty fast to this status where we have all the necessary tools to build applications which are a little bit more interesting than just creating a tic-tac-toe or something like this. And I hope you like what you see. Now, what do I want from you now? I want you to make this a really fully fledged Pony Explorer or Pony whatever. What do I mean with fully fledged Pony Explorer? Make it more beautiful. Make it sparkle. Okay? So really use I don't know, the cutest background image that you can find. I don't care. Make it a little bit more beautiful. First thing. Second thing, I want you to add 2 buttons here. The first button, previous page. The second button, next page. Got it? I want paging. Okay? And I also want you to turn this ugly UL into a CSS grid where you display a little bit more. Feel free to use the embedded images. So remember, in our Pony API, we get back images. See here, the image? Feel free to use these images to display an image of the pony, for instance, inside of your grid. Okay? This is what I want you to do. You can use the rest of the lesson to get started. And I would like you to finish this until next week. That shouldn't be too complicated. Okay? Good. I will put the recording of this lesson online because it's an important lesson. And we will practice next time together with a different API. Good. That was it for today.